Okay guys, so in this one we're going to cover something really important, because if your skin tones don't look good, it doesn't matter how good your image is, it's going to look terrible. So we're going to be looking at how to use the HSL sliders in combination with the curves, because most people rely on the HSL for skin tones because they're much simpler, but they are very, very limiting. So these two images here, I developed the skin tones all by myself and I love them. They look awesome, but they are not possible, I repeat, not possible without the use of the curves, and we'll go over why that is. These two images are going to be really good to show you guys what I'm talking about. So this image, for example, I'm shooting into the sun, so it's quite harsh, midday pretty much, and then this one I just spun around, sat on the bed, and then I have the sun hitting the front of me. So it's the same location but quite different lighting, so same conditions, different lighting, and this is going to really help us. So in this one I am very dark. I actually brighten this image a lot, but if we grab this tool here, we're going to see how it corresponds on the curves with the dot there, and you can see where our skin tones are, so how bright our skin tones are by using this selection tool here. And you can see we've got pretty dark skin tones. They're falling below the midtones. So these would be the areas we'd have to focus on for this image in terms of skin tone. And then if I go to the other image and we grab the selection tool again, and we run it across, you can see we've got much brighter skin tones in this one because the light is directly hitting me, and this area of the curve would be where we would have to focus for this image in terms of skin tone. And I'll just show you guys, if we turn the curves off, this is how much the curves are playing a role in this image. So pretty much the entire edit is curves. Really big difference there. So go to this image, turn the curves off and on. Really big difference there. So from doing this, you can see that our skin tones span a pretty wide area of the image, a pretty wide brightness of the image. So we've got skin tones that are way up here near the highlights and the curves, pretty bright, and then way down here in the shadows. So we can get pretty dark ones if we find an even darker point. So it spans a big part of the image. So when we're working with skin tones, trying to focus in on our skin tones, we want to think in terms of shadowy skin tones, midtones, and then highlight midtones. Want to break it up into that. At least people think of their whole image like that, but we want to think like that even in terms of our skin tones. Okay, so when we want to change and adjust our skin tones, we have the red, green, and blue channel to mix and match in these areas that we just identified. So the midtones, we can adjust our curves however we like to really target these areas. We can put any color we want in there, but if we come down to HSL and say, for example, we move the oranges, the first thing you'll notice is that it's affecting all of the oranges in the entire image. And that's a problem because we want to target these little areas of light that we just identified before. And this is true for the saturation. It's affecting all of the colors in the entire image, or all of the oranges in the entire image. We don't want that. We want to get really targeted with our skin tones. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get into this app called Adobe Capture, which is free. So I'm just going to find the image, this one. And now we can see what these colors are actually made up of. So here we have all our points, and if we just make all these points on our skin tone, so I'll just drag that into a shadowy skin tone. I'll put some on the highlights of skin tones. So this one here, for example, is a highlight of skin tone. Now, don't go through this every time I make a new color or edit or anything. This is just a really good way to teach you guys. I know this all in my head, but this is just a really good way to get across to you guys what I mean. Now, up the top here, we have our color palette, and if we hit the tick in the middle, so now we can actually see what these colors are made up of. And here we have the R slider, the green slider, and the blue slider. So these are our curves, but as sliders. And we have the top left box up in the corner selected. We can change boxes, but we'll go top left. So this was a shadowy skin tone. So if we go back, that was this one right here. And if we hit the tick again, we'll go back to where we were. So it's saying this shade has a bit more red in it and not so much cyan, has a bit more purple and has a bit more yellows. So you'd take out a bit more blue, and this is the brightness slider down the bottom here. Okay, so if we come back over to Lightroom, let's grab the selection tool again, and it was about here where we grabbed that color before in the app, and you can see that is about where it's affecting. And then if we look at the curves, the app said we had a bit more red than cyan, so the red curve comes up just a touch. The greens, there was a few less greens, and that introduces purple, so we have a few more of those. And then we had more yellows than blues, so if we pull the blue out, we had a few more yellows left in there. But that's not that noticeable in the curves, because what's happening is that color palette is also affected by HSL here. So if we reset these, you can see that really changes our skin tones there. So that's why it isn't overly noticeable when looking at these curves, but that is my thought process when I'm doing this. I am trying to add in a little less blue so I get a bit more of a yellow to the highlight skin tones especially, and then really dip down the greens so we get a bit more purple in those shadowy skin tones. So that brings up the question, should we use just the curves or should we use the curves first then HSL? Well, it's a combination of both, but curves are your foundation, and I'll go over some scenarios with you. Okay, so I knew I wanted a reddish purple in the shadows, and then I wanted my warm yellow highlights to my skin tones. So I would start by doing an S curve in each of the channels, just 3 points, and then start playing with the colors in combination with the HSL. So I'd go back and forth, mixing and matching. What most people try to do, and what I tried at the start, is to just go, right, so my yellows are sort of naturally in the brighter parts, so I'll make them nice and orange. Oranges, I want to be kind of red. My reds, I want to be a little bit more purple, but there's not enough control. There's only a certain amount of combinations there. And even if you do that with the luminance, it's not enough control. And just keep in mind, playing with the HSL, there is an overlap of effect of these colors. So moving the yellows will slightly affect your oranges, but moving the yellows probably isn't gonna affect your reds because there is oranges in between those two colors. And a very important distinction to make is that with the curves, you are adding in a color that never existed in the image, or you can do that. So say I add in green into the image. That green never existed in the image, but down in the HSL, there is no way to put green into this image. You're only changing a color that already existed in the image. So for example, it is not possible to put purple in the shadows with the HSL, but it is very easy with the curves. Just pull green down, get purple in the shadows. Not possible with the HSL. And say we put lots of green into the image, for example. Let's really bring up the green, and then come down to saturation, for example. Bring the saturation down, bring the saturation up. There's no change. It only affects the colors that were originally in the image, the HSL does. Okay, and another thing that can help you determine the color you want is to look at the colors outside of your skin tone. So in this image, for example, we have yellows on the walls, and let's say we're trying to emulate my style. So, or if I was trying to emulate another style, but say if I was looking at my image and I was like, I want that, I would identify that it's very important for my yellows to be very orange. And it's probably more important that yellows that aren't skin tones are very orange for this style. So I would have to bring up the yellows in the hue, but then that is going to affect your skin tones, and we might have to adjust for that. This image, it doesn't affect the skin tones too much. It does a little bit just there, but because we need colors that were originally in the image that aren't skin tones, the HSL for this slider takes priority. Maybe if we just change the image we're working with, So we'll make these yellows really orange over here, so that's what we've done, and that will affect skin tones. So we will adjust that by maybe adding a bit more blue into those brighter skin tones to correct for that. But we still get our original yellows to be nice and warm. Okay, so another example, I have put a bit extra red in the shadows. I wanted those red purpley shadows, so left a bit more red in there and pulled out a bit of extra green that introduces purple. And what happens when I do that, I introduce this reddish tone into the shadows, but what that has done is it's affected my reds that were already in the image. So my lips, for example, they start to go a little too red, so I'll shift them to a bit more of an orange. That way we get those purpley rich tones in the shadows, and then the original reds don't get too red. And here's another good example. This is just a screenshot off one of my videos. So it's a good example of, here's my skin tones, nice and red. That's where they're sitting in the brightness scale. And then over here, we have real purpley rich red tones as well. And as you can see, they fall within the same brightness. So we are also adding those purpley reddish tones to areas that aren't skin tones. And I don't recommend doing too many points in your curves. Some people say, why not just do, say, right here in the shadowy tones, just do a little bump there. Why do this big S curve? Well, if we did just a little bump there, you can see how it affects the whole curve, and would have to do so many little anchor points to make sure that it's just affecting that little spot there. So now it's pretty much just affecting this area here, added a tiny bit of red there. But that is very unpractical. It's not going to look good across all of your images. Light naturally really nicely wraps around things. So these really gradual curves are really important to create a smooth transition of colors, because that's what light does. And that's a mistake I made at the start, making heaps of points, trying to really control stuff. You can put heaps of points, but you want it to still be pretty gradual. Okay, so you shouldn't have to adjust your curves too much photo to photo. For example, this shot here and this shot here, these were very different lighting like I went over at the start, but we have zero change to the curves, but we have pretty decent change to the HSL here. So if we just keep an eye on the HSL, come across this one, quite a bit of a change. No change at all to the curves. Most of the time that is the case. You don't need to move the curves too much. But this image, for example, this one was a bit more challenging to edit, but just a slight change to the curves for this one. But majority of it is in the HSL. I find that the colors you put into the image with the curves are very consistent and you don't need to change them very much, but the colors that already exist in the image from the HSL, they need to be adjusted and vary quite a bit photo to photo. Because when you think about it, no matter what, you are putting that color in that brightness. Where HSL, these colors with the white balance and stuff can change a bit. And that's if you have good curves that needs no adjusting. So how do you know if you have good curves? And what should you do when you're doing this is have heaps of different images and different lighting scenarios down the bottom. So I usually have like 10 of them, and as I make adjustments to these curves, I'm going to, that could be good. It might only look good on this image though. So what I do is quickly copy and paste and apply it across all of these different images down the bottom, because you definitely want to be working with a white balanced image, but it can be quite hard to white balance an image. What I do, just apply it across like 20 different photos, and you'll start to see the pattern of what you're adjusting and that it's working across multiple images. Okay, we're going to leave that one there. Quite a bit to take in that video, but we're going to be expanding on this in the next one. Catch you later.